This is Fit to Succeed in partnership with NordicFitnessEducation.com with hosts Ben Pratt. Thanks for joining us.
Beta-glidins or omega-glidins or gamma-glidins or gluteomorphins or glutenins. I mean, there's 62 identified components of poorly digested wheat that may trigger an immune response. Why is every laboratory only testing one?
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another Fit to Succeed podcast. Today, I am so privileged to have with me Dr. Tom O'Brien, a functional medicine practitioner from the United States and an expert in the subject of gluten and autoimmunity. Dr. O'Brien, it's such a pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you have written a couple of different books, one on autoimmunity, and you've just released one on the brain and brain health. But in your first book, you had a fascinating backstory that led you into the world of functional medicine. And especially your expertise tends to be on the areas of wheat, gluten, and autoimmunity. Would you be able to briefly share with the listeners how you went from where you were in your 20s to becoming a functional medicine practitioner?
Sure. I'm not sure which story I put in that first book. There are a few stories, but the primary one is that my wife and I could not get pregnant.
That's the one.
I was an intern at the time, and I called the 7 most famous holistic doctors I'd ever heard of in 1979. And I was able to reach them all and ask them, what do you do for infertility? They told me what they do, and I put a protocol together, and we were pregnant in 6 weeks.
Wow. And
my neighbors in married housing, we lived on campus at the time, they'd been through artificial insemination and nothing had worked. And they asked if I'd work with them. And I said, well, I don't think it's going to hurt you in any way. Sure. She was pregnant in 3 months. Mm. So we were hot to trot and help every couple get pregnant that wanted to get pregnant. And, there's not much in medicine that's an all or every. But clinically, this is an every. In my experience, this is an every. Mm-hmm. Every patient that has a hormone-related issue of any type always has foods that they're eating that they don't know are a problem for them.
Oh, wow.
And those foods are triggering inflammation in the body. Mrs. Patient, if you pull at a chain, it always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end, it's your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, wherever your genetic weak link is, that's where the chain's going to break. And the pull on the chain is inflammation, something triggering inflammation at the cellular level is always the cells on fire, always. Mm-hmm. So the rule of thumb is stop throwing gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so every single person with a hormone-related issue that we'd see in practice had foods that they were eating regularly that they didn't know were causing inflammation in their body because it didn't affect their gut when they ate the foods. With celiac disease, we know that for every one person that has gut symptoms, there are 8 that don't. Mm-hmm. They've got brain or kidney or joint or muscle symptoms. So they can't tell when they eat something, 8 hours later, they get a migraine and they don't associate it's what they ate that was the trigger. Or the next morning, they can't get out of bed, their joints are all locked up. They don't associate.
Sorry, did you notice there, Dr. O'Brien, that the people you were trying to help in those early years to become pregnant, did you notice that there were specific foods? Because I recall you identified things like wheat and dairy and sugar being some of the primary things you removed that actually helped people to get pregnant.
That was a primary, yes. There were a couple of things that were just givens, and one was go wheat-free, gluten-free, dairy-free. That was one. The second one, and here's one for you, that in the world of fertility and infertility, when a couple mates and a guy ejaculates, millions of sperm are swimming up the canal. How come only one gets through to penetrate the egg? When the sperm hits the egg, it secretes an enzyme out of the head of the sperm that digests a little bit of the mucus around the egg, and then the sperm can swim right through. When it gets through, it activates genes inside the egg that shut down the mucus layer so no other sperm can get in. That's how it works. That enzyme in the head of the sperm is completely zinc dependent. So when guys have a zinc insufficiency, they're firing duds. And they may have good sperm count and sperm motility, but they're firing duds because they don't have functional enzymes to digest a little bit of the mucus around the egg. And nobody checks that.
And I can see that. I can see where you're going with that link. Then there's the link with wheat and potentially phytates and mineral blockers. Is that where you're going with that with regards to zinc?
That's one of the components. The other is inflammation in the gut inhibits absorption of many different nutrients. Zinc is one of them. Iron's the most common mineral that people are deficient in if they have a wheat imbalance. But the phytates binding to minerals so that they're not absorbable, that's another. So it's inflammation, it's phytates. There are a few mechanisms. The point, though, it's easy to check for a zinc insufficiency. It's very easy. And we've had a few couples. I didn't treat the female at all. I just told the guy, take some zinc, come back in a month or a couple of months, and the woman was doing some tests. It takes a while to get the test results back. But the result by the time she was ready, for test results and treatment was they were pregnant. And so the treatment protocols were based on healthy pregnancy as opposed to infertility.
That's fascinating, really fascinating. Now, I think maybe we just step back a little bit and clarify a couple of things. Now, gluten is obviously a well-known protein compound found in wheat, barley, rye, spelt, and some other grains. How does gluten itself develop some level of immune sensitivity in the body? How does that initiate?
That's a really good question. And we have to back up a little bit. That it's a misnomer to focus on gluten. It really is wheat-related disorders. That there are many different compounds in wheat that can trigger an immune response that are immunogenic. Gluten is the one that everybody talks about, and that's an important one. But there's also wheat amylase trypsin inhibitors. There's gluteomorphins. There's wheat germ agglutinins, the lectins in wheat. There are the FODMAPs in wheat. There are many different components in wheat that may trigger the problem. And that's important to know because one of the curveballs, I guess it's an American term, but one of the confusing things in identifying wheat-related disorders is that the blood test that every laboratory in the world does and claims it's a test for wheat sensitivity looks at one peptide of poorly digested wheat, one of the gluten proteins called alpha-gliadin. It's a 33 amino acid peptide, and it's important. About 50% of celiacs will have an immune response to alpha-gliadin, but 50% don't. They're responding to other components of wheat. And if the only thing your lab is checking is alpha-gliadin, you got a problem. Because if it comes back positive, that person does have that sensitivity. But if it comes back negative, it doesn't mean wheat's okay. It just means they don't have a problem with alpha-gliadin. They may have beta-gliadins or omega-gliadins or gamma-gliadins or gluteomorphins or glutenins. I mean, there's 62 identified components of poorly digested wheat that may trigger an immune response. Why is every laboratory only testing one? Because that's what they did in 1995 or 1999. And so unfortunately, that is the primary test that most hospitals, most doctors, laboratories are still testing. It's an important one, but it's not comprehensive. There are new tests available now around the world. In Great Britain, there are tests now that look at 10 different peptides of poorly digested wheat. There are tests in the US that look at 26 peptides of poorly digested wheat. So the laboratory world is expanding so that we have more tools to accurately identify the problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in theory, what you're saying is someone could actually not have a positive response to gluten, but they could still have significant issues with wheat or other grass-based foods.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's not gluten, it's alpha-gliadin. So the blood test is not testing glutens, because there are many glutens that someone may react to. It's just alpha-gliadin. But as you just demonstrated, we've been taught to think the tests are checking for gluten sensitivity, and they're not. They're checking for one gluten of many that are in wheat.
And that highlights a weakness already in the way foods are labeled, doesn't it? Because foods are generally labeled as gluten-free. They're not labeled as wheat-free, for example.
Exactly right. And here's a curveball for you. All of the equipment that tests gluten-free foods, they're only checking alpha-gliadin.
Right.
They're not checking any of the other immunogenic peptides of poorly digested wheat. So your oat bars may be alpha-gliadin free, but they may have omega-gliadins in them. And you'd never know because the tests are only screening for alpha-gliadin in the food. It's a huge problem. I mean, this is a curveball. When you think about this one, when I read an article that just captures my mind, I tape it on the ceiling of my bedroom. And when I go to sleep at night, I'll look at it. Wow. And I've got a little pad and paper next to the bed. In the middle of the night, I pull the pen out from this little device, and a really soft light shines down on the paper so I can write and not be blinded by turning the lights on in the room, right? And in the morning I wake up and it's, oh yeah, that's right. I did think about that, right? So this is one of those concepts for everyone that's listening here. There is no accurate testing in the world that confirms poorly digested peptides of wheat are eliminated from a food. The only testing looks at alpha-gliadin, one component of wheat. So if you have a gluteomorphin sensitivity, which is common for people with attention deficit, autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, if wheat is affecting those components of your brain, that's the weak link in your chain, and you have a gluteomorphin sensitivity triggering that, the foods that you're eating that test to be alpha-gliadin free may still have gluteomorphins in them, and you're triggering the depression or the anxiety or the schizophrenia. So you can't count on the testing that's out there now. One has to be aware of that. It's a valuable tool to use those tests, but they're notoriously incomplete.
Yeah, I've got experience of that myself. About 10 years ago, I realized I had issues with wheat, and I came off all wheat and wheat-related products. And at that time here in the UK, there wasn't a lot of alternative options, and at least the ones that were there were pretty unpalatable. So I pretty much just avoided for about 2 years anything remotely related to wheat at all. And then as the products that were on the market have been improved and introduced, and there's a greater range now here in the UK, I've tried different ones that claim to be gluten-free, as you suggest, and I definitely react to some and not to others, and I've had to learn through hard experience which ones seem to be cleaner than others, even though they all claim to be gluten-free.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, the tests are available in the US that are much more comprehensive, and for review purposes, people can go to my site and look up the test Wheat Zoomer.
Wheat Zoomer. Right.
Wheat Zoomer. It zooms in on the problem. And you can see what's out there and what's available. They're not available in Europe yet. The laboratory does not have any current plans of expanding that I know of. But you can see the types of tests that are available.
Now, perhaps we could just again back up one little step, and we've kind of touched around topics on this, but what exactly is the difference between celiac disease, which is perhaps the most well-known issue around alpha-gliadin and gluten, and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which you have spoken about often over the years?
Really good question. Celiac disease is the autoimmune disease that has more evidence, more concrete evidence that validates the concept. There's a trilogy in the development of autoimmune diseases. First, you have to have the gene. Second, there has to be an environmental trigger that sets it off, wheat. And third, you have to have intestinal permeability, the leaky gut. And celiac has validated that that mechanism is common for every autoimmune disease that they look at. That mechanism, I call it the trilogy. So that's celiac disease. Now, There are many more genes than just the two that we all know about for celiac, HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. There are many more genes around wheat sensitivity.
Mhm.
Now, if you have a wheat sensitivity and you have the genes that wheat sensitivity is going to manifest in your gut, you get celiac disease. If you have a wheat sensitivity and you carry the genes that say it's going to manifest in your brain, you get depression and you're prescribed antidepressants. If you have a sensitivity to wheat and you carry the genes that manifest vulnerability to joint problems, you get rheumatoid.
Right.
So it just depends on what your genetic vulnerability is. Wheat sensitivity can manifest in any tissue in your body, with or without celiac disease.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, many of our specialists, many of our gastroenterologists were taught that if you don't have celiac disease, you don't have a problem with wheat, meaning that's the only manifestation of a problem with wheat.
Mhm.
We now know, and there are hundreds of studies on this, that's not true. Celiac disease is a critically important one to diagnose because it can kill you.
Mhm.
It can, slowly, but it can. But that's only one of many, many different conditions that may manifest with a sensitivity to wheat.
Mhm. Now you mentioned there that, which was fascinating, that there is links between food sensitivity, such as wheat sensitivity, and other autoimmune conditions. And it made me think: is there any a research or data that you're aware of that quantifies the increased risk for somebody who has a wheat sensitivity to developing a future autoimmune condition?
Oh my goodness, yes. There actually is more evidence of autoimmune development with a wheat sensitivity than there is evidence of celiac disease with a
Oh,
wheat
really?
sensitivity.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that those that have been classified as non-celiac wheat sensitive produce higher levels of antibodies to self than those that are diagnosed with a vulnerability to celiac disease, meaning they carry the genes HLA-DQ2 or DQ8. It's extremely common. And Harvard, I've got 5 studies on this. I have a full day course on wheat-related disorders for healthcare practitioners and trainers.
Mhm.
I have 5 studies in there on this. But one of them is Hollon, Hollon, and his team at Harvard. They took people recently diagnosed with celiac disease, so they were still eating wheat. People who had been diagnosed with celiac were on a wheat-free diet for a minimum of a year, and their microvilli had grown back.
Mhm.
People who were diagnosed with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, meaning they had a problem with wheat, but they didn't have celiac,
Mhm.
and people that had no problems with wheat that could be identified. They took all 4 groups. What did they find? Every single person develops intestinal permeability within 5 minutes of being exposed to wheat,
Oh, wow.
within 5 minutes of it getting out of the stomach into the gut.
Mhm.
Every single person. If you're a human, you don't have the enzymes to break down wheat into individual amino acids. No one does. And it's not a problem for people until they cross the line of what's called oral tolerance. When your immune system will no longer tolerate this minor irritant, wheat, because it really is a minor irritant. But when your immune system says, you know what, I'm done with you. You are not coming around here anymore, and you start making antibodies to wheat, that's called a loss of oral tolerance.
Mhm.
When you lose oral tolerance for the rest of your life, you are going to get intestinal permeability every time you're exposed to wheat.
Do you think that that's become more common because we eat so much wheat in society? I mean, for example, the UK Flour Bureau has indicated that the average person in the UK now consumes about 74 kilograms of wheat per person per year. You know, so it's almost your whole body weight in wheat on an annual basis. Do you
That's
think
really
that
true.
volume has got a problem to do with it?
Well, it does. It does have, because it's the volume of offense that comes in. You your immune system, we have the exact same body as our ancestors thousands of years ago. Our immune systems are identical to our ancestors. What did our ancestors' immune systems have to protect us against? Bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, and fungus.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. There was not any streams coming out of the mountains full of Mountain Dew or Coca-Cola or orange juice or Guinness, excuse me, but there were no streams coming out of nature with any of that, right? And in our society today, we have so many toxins that we're exposed to in our world, so many toxins, from the phthalates in plastics. You put plastic wrap on food, you put it in the refrigerator, the next day you want to eat that chicken, it's got phthalates in it, that the chemicals leach out of the plastic. You put your food, your leftover vegetables in a plastic container and put them in the refrigerator, next day you eat them, they've got phthalates in them. The plastics leak phthalates into the food. The heavy metals that are in the air and in the fish. We're just exposed to so much. I mean, I do a full day course on the environmental influences on autoimmune diseases. We're exposed to so much of this stuff, and your immune system, why is 70% of the immune system in the gut? Why is that? Well, that's where our ancestors were exposed to the vast majority of anything that might be threatening, that the immune system would have to protect us from. Bugs, parasites, viruses, molds, and fungus. But now you eat a Twinkie or you eat a cupcake, and those poor fats, those transformed fatty acids, the excess sugars, the artificial sugars, the flours that are in there, the preservatives that are in there, your immune system has to fight every single chemical that it recognizes that's coming down the GI tract. So it's constantly 24/7 fighting this, fighting this, fighting this, fighting this. And
so it's a hyperactivity of the immune system is what you're saying.
It's a hyperactivity, and eventually that hyperactivity says, you know what, you're a minor irritant. You've always been a little bit of an annoyance and not a big deal. That's called oral tolerance. But you know what? I don't have any room for any more annoyances right now. You're out of here. Boom. Now you start making antibodies to wheat. You've lost oral tolerance. And that is not because of GMO. GMO, of course, those foods make it worse, but this is because of the volume of toxins that we're exposed to in our world today. We lose tolerance because of that volume that we're exposed to, not because of genetically modified. Genetically modified makes it worse. They're more offensive, but that's not the trigger for the increase, the ramping up. And it's a critical point to understand. Because if we focus and say, well, it's the genetically modified foods, then our fight goes into fighting genetically modified foods, which is a good fight. But if we say, well, it's the volume of toxins we're exposed to includes genetically modified foods, then our consciousness takes a step back and we see the bigger picture, and you start working to fight the air pollution. You realize you can't live in a house full of mold. That's air pollution. You're getting for 10, 15 hours a day. As long as you're in that house, you're breathing it with every breath. The number one type of Alzheimer's is called inhalation Alzheimer's. It's what you're breathing that's causing the inflammation in the brain, right? So you can't live in old musty houses. You got to clean them out or move if you want to maintain your brain function. That's all in the new book.
Yeah, excellent. And so you kind of made me almost expand the thought process that if somebody suspects that they have issues with wheat, that they actually can't just look at wheat. That might be a place to start, but they should consider cleaning up the whole diet overall.
High five, man. High five.
Yeah, I'll do that.
That's it. That's exactly it. That's what we want all of your listeners to be realizing, is that we have to take a step. You want to change the dying direction of this planet? It's the children. It's the children that we have to create the environment where they can think outside the box to fix the problems that we've created. How do you help children think out of the box? Protect their brains. How do you protect their brains? reduce the amount of toxins they're exposed to. Why was it that the Nordic countries did a study? It was supposed to be a 6-month study. It was almost 2.5 years. Should we recommend women not breastfeed a first pregnancy? Why did they do that? Because these women have been eating the fish coming out of the fjords for 25 years. The fish are loaded with PCBs. Mm-hmm. There is no study that shows the amount of PCBs in a fish that you eat is a problem. There are no studies on that. However, if you can't digest, break down, and eliminate, detox these chemicals in the fish you're eating, they accumulate in your body. Where do they accumulate? They're called endocrine disruptors. They accumulate in the estrogen and testosterone receptor loaded sites in your body, like your breasts. Mm-hmm. So a woman's breasts get loaded with PCBs over 25 years of eating healthy fish. The minor amount accumulates. Now she gets pregnant, has a wonderful pregnancy, has a good delivery. Now the body is being told, make milk, make milk. Where does the raw material come from for the milk that mom is going to feed baby? From the fat cells of the breast that are loaded with PCBs. Mm-hmm. So that colostrum, the first 3 to 5 days of mother's milk, is loaded with PCBs that are neurotoxins to the baby's brain.
Oh, you're freaking out every mother who's listening to this, I tell you.
You're absolutely right. That's the goal here. It's like, wake up, wake up. So the commission came out and said, no, it's more important to breastfeed than not. And I agree with that conclusion. However, every woman of childbearing age needs to detox her breast before she gets pregnant, 6 months to a year beforehand. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to have a baby in the next few years, detox your breast. Learn how to detox your breast. There's a whole protocol to that. You have to check your genes to see if your detox capabilities are good for methylation, and do you make enough glutathione, and can you use the glutathione, and do you have good histylation and acetylation? You have to do the genes to see where your vulnerabilities are. Then you take the nutrition for all that, plus you use castor oil packs on your chest in the evenings 3 nights a week. And in 6 months, your breasts are detoxed.
Fascinating. Now, I wonder if we could jump back to, you kind of began to allude there to problems around testing, you know, that even if we have a blood test done, it may not identify a wheat intolerance. It may only identify half of the celiac problems that people have. Now, we're obviously directing this particular podcast towards personal trainers, fitness professionals. Most of them are not going to have access to lab testing. And so in that scenario, and they're working with their clients, if they suspect that there might be a problem with something like wheat, what can they do to try and be a bit more solid or confirm that there could be a food intolerance?
Really good question. Mrs. Patient or Mrs. Client, I'd like you to do a trial period here of 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. No wheat, dairy, or sugar for 3 weeks. And let's talk about the things that you can eat. Or my friend, the nutritionist, would be happy to have a session with you and refer them over to a nutritionist if you need to, who can walk them through some recipes, or you get my books. You know, there's lots of recipes in the books. And 3 weeks, let's just see how your performance is in your training, how much energy you have, how flexible your body is, your range of motion increases, but mostly your energy. Let's just see how you do.
Mm-hmm. So like an elimination diet
diet of wheat, dairy, and sugar. And some people will take it all the way to grains, just no grains. And that's helpful. That's a valid one to do also. Mm-hmm. But we like to go with wheat, dairy, and sugar as a starting point. And let's just see how you do over 3 weeks. And they notice they just feel a whole lot better. Then one day they come in and they've got bags under their eyes. They're just tired. Oh my God. I had pizza last night and I woke up this morning. I felt like I was going to die. And I said, wonderful. Congratulations. I'm glad you feel terrible. Nobody can argue with you. That's what that food does to you. Right? So as a personal trainer, the recommendation is an elimination diet, but you can't just do wheat because so many people have a sensitivity to dairy, and it's called a cross-reactivity. Mm-hmm. That if you keep eating dairy, you keep having wheat antibodies. Many people will still think their bodies think they're eating wheat if they still take dairy.
Right.
And so you do wheat and dairy as a minimum together. A more comprehensive would be to go grain-free for 3 weeks. Grain-free and sugar-free. Grain-free, dairy-free, sugar-free for 3 weeks.
All right. And then provoke the system by seeing if is there a response 3 weeks later when you've cleaned it up. That's what we're
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Now, one more question, and then I'm going to ask you just very briefly about your book. Do you have, there are certain foods, if you look on the food allergy labels, most foods in the United Kingdom, certainly they identify in bold anything that's supposed to be allergenic. And oats is one that often comes up as allergenic, but yet oats are not a gluten-containing grain technically. Why is it that some people will respond negatively to oats if they are assured that they only have a wheat sensitivity?
Good question. When oats grow out of the ground, there's no toxic gluten in them. When you buy oats off the shelf, there's toxic gluten in them.
Right.
It's a cross-contamination. The trucks that haul the oats from the fields to the manufacturing facilities hauled wheat last week. They don't clean the trucks. Or the manufacturing facility itself. There's a line over on the other side of the building that's doing wheat on the assembly line, wheat products, and then the dust in the air comes down over, falls on the oat assembly line. Very, very common to see. Or the farmer in his fields of oats that, quarter mile down the road, there's some wheat fields and some of the seeds blow over with the air into the field with the oats. So there's a couple strands of wheat here and there in the oat fields. Farmer's not going to stop his combine, get out, get down, go over and pull that and keep it inside the combine, the tractor. Now he's just going to cut it all down and put it in the pile. And so you get contamination issues. Now there are oats that are labeled gluten-free, and they've done some studies here on that. 98.7% of those are gluten-free, but right, but 2% are not.
Right.
And so if you're one of those celiacs or a sensitive gluten-sensitive person, and you get the oats of the 2% that are contaminated, doesn't matter that it's only 2% of the products. You happen to eat one of them, and now you're off to the races making antibodies that will go 3, 4, 5 months from a single exposure. And if the weak link in your chain is your brain, you make more antibodies to your brain from a single exposure to that little bit of wheat that was in the oats product.
Oh, wow, it's unbelievable that it lasts even that long, 4 or 5 months from just a single exposure if you're very sensitive. Now, you mentioned the brain there. I just want to give you a chance because you've just published a great new book called You Can Fix Your Brain. And that obviously contains further information along the lines of autoimmunity and health-related issues surrounding our brain. Perhaps you'd like just to share just for a moment what the basis of your book is about and why our listeners should perhaps give it a look.
Oh, thank you so much. I chose the brain and how to take a functional medicine view of brain dysfunction. There is a pyramid in terms of how 4 quadrants to look at when dealing with a health issue, any health issue. And I chose the brain because everyone knows someone who had a heart attack and survived, changed their diet, started exercising, they're doing better than they've done in years. Most of us know someone diagnosed with cancer, went through the protocols, is in complete remission, they're doing great. No one knows anyone diagnosed with a brain deterioration disease who's doing great. Those with depression, those with anxiety, taking the medications, they're holding on, they're doing okay, they're not doing great. And it's you don't have a deficiency of Prozac causing depression. It's trying to put a Band-Aid on an oozing wound, right? So brain deterioration diseases terrify us. They terrify us. We don't think there's anything that can be done, but you can fix your brain. So I chose the brain as the platform to understand this pyramid. Okay, what's the pyramid? On the base of the pyramid is your structure. That's the home of muscles, bones, ligaments, trainers, chiropractors, massage therapists, posture, chairs that you sit in, all of that. And a mechanical problem can cause any health condition, anything. There are many studies, hundreds and hundreds of studies on kidney problems, gallbladder problems, brain problems, vision problems, hearing problems, gut problems that are corrected by fixing structure. So sometimes the structure is the critically important component that has to be fixed. And then in the three sides of the pyramid coming up from the base are biochemistry. That's what we eat and drink, the air we breathe. Then there is emotional or spiritual. Some people have heard of stinking thinking, and it can cause any health problem, Joe Dispenza's book, You Are the Placebo, is a great book to read to understand that. And then there is this new category called electromagnetic that in the last 15 years has come on the scene, and it's just as potent as biochemistry or structure or emotional or spiritual. So there's four sides that have to be looked at for any health problem. And if you got a health problem and you're looking at what nutrition to take, that may be helpful, but that's only one side. If you're like losing memory, if you're forgetting things and you start taking some N-acetylcysteine or some alpha lipoic acid or some combinations of brain boosting nutrients and you're feeling better, but you still have the alarm clock right next to your head on the nightstand next to the bed, frying your brain every night with electromagnetic leakage, you're not going to get well. You'll feel a little better, but you can't just do the nutrition. You got to also think about the electromagnetics and about the spirit and about the structure. So the book is how to look at all of this with hundreds of jaw-dropping statistics and examples and the studies. For example, you can't use aluminum foil touching food because the aluminum foil breaks. It breaks into hundreds of little pieces. And when you see the pictures in the book of magnified aluminum foil after it's been in the oven for an hour and a half, oh my goodness, because all those broken little pieces get in the food.
All right.
You just can't see it, but it's in the food. Then just go to Google and type in aluminum and Alzheimer's. And you start to understand why you can't use aluminum foil to touch your food.
Wow, it sounds like this is going to be a fascinating read, and in your inimitable style, Dr. Tom, it's going to be full of shocking facts and motivational information that's going to cause people to change how they live. And
give you one more. You're absolutely right. Thank you. That's the goal. Here's one more. When you fill the car with gas, with petrol, can you sometimes smell the petrol?
Sure.
You're smelling benzene. Right. Benzene is a neurotoxin that kills brain cells every time you smell it. Well, I have to fill up my car, but you're standing downwind. Walk around to the other side of the hose. Now you're standing upwind. You don't smell it anymore.
Yeah, very clever.
Right? But we just don't think about those kinds of things. My goal in the book is to change your paradigm so that you have more awareness. You take a step back and you have more awareness of how your current lifestyle is impacting on your brain.
And I have absolutely no doubt, Dr. Tom, that that's exactly what the book will do. And it's been such a pleasure to talk with you for this short half hour and to just explore some of that information that you have learned about over the years. And we express our thanks to you and the listeners for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share via social media. You can also rate the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. If you'd like to know more about us, then check out our range of online courses at www.nordicfitnesseducation.com.